Hi there. Welcome to the Sparrow Studio Stash Buster series. My name is Bradie, and today you're going to be keeping me company while I do some sewing of these gorgeous log cabin blocks. Are you just joining us in our Stash Buster series? Not really even sure what we're up to? We have been working on this really great quilt called Stay Centered, designed by our very own Sheila Vanderlinden. And you can get that as a free download on our website at sparrowquiltco.com. So when you go there, you're going to see a banner. Hi, I'm Bradie from Sparrow Quilt Company, and this is our Stash Buster series. I can hear something over here. Hi, welcome to our Stash Buster series. Okay. Turn that all the way down. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me now? We're good now, Maddie? Okay, I'm just going to start all over again. Welcome to the Sparrow Studios of Sparrow Quilt Company Stash Busters series. My name is Bradie, and today you'll be keeping me company while I begin sewing up this gorgeous quilt behind me. This quilt is called Stay Centered, and if you're just joining us for the first time, you can find it at our website, sparrowquiltco.com. On the front page, you're going to see a banner of me, and I'm going to be going like this. I just love this quilt. You're going to click on that banner there. Maybe, guys, it's time to kill the shipping tape. Anyways, that's going to take you to a new page where you're going to be able to put in your name and email, and you are going to get an email reply, and this pattern is going to be attached to it. So then you can just download that and follow along with the fun. If you didn't get a chance to watch our videos last week, go ahead and check them out on our Facebook page. The first one, it was just a test, and it ended up just being really long and really fun. First 20 minutes or so, I'm just singing and talking to myself and customers, and I look like a bit of a crazy person, but enjoy that. If you don't want to watch any of that, just skip forward. I think it's 13 minutes, and you can see where I actually start working, where I begin cutting out all my fabrics for this project. And then the second video is there as well, where I go along and I cut out each of my different colors and cut out my background fabrics in order to get ready for piecing this gorgeous quilt. Now, I'm going to get sewing today. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that I have got my seam allowance set up properly. I don't know if any of you have ever had trouble with your seam allowance when you're piecing a quilt, but I learned the hard way that it's very important to keep my seam allowance consistent throughout a quilt. So I like to use these tools. It's called the Ideal Seam Gauge and the Ideal Seam Guide. And you can see on my seam gauge, there are several different holes, and they each represent a different seam allowance. For us quilters, we really like our 1/4 inch. I will even go to a scant 1/4 inch, which luckily is included on this ruler. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this little purple ruler and set it underneath my needle and my presser foot. And I've chosen the scant 1/4 inch option, and I'm just going to drop my needle into that little hole. And then to hold it in place, I'm going to drop my presser foot. Now the next part is using the Ideal Seam Guide, and it has got a layer of rubberized adhesive on the back, which is covered by a layer of acetate. So I'm going to peel that off, and I'm going to keep this safe because when I'm done with this, I'm going to put this acetate back onto the ruler to protect that sticky surface. So I'm going to peel that off. I'm just going to put it under the edge of my machine to keep it safe. Now what's happening here on my machine is that I have a 1/4 inch foot on it. However, my scant 1/4 inch is showing me that I'm not going to be sewing right at the edge of my foot. So I'm going to use this little cutout here to fit around my foot so that I can make my seam allowance edge closer to my needle than the edge of my foot. So I'm going to line up this guy with this edge of the seam gauge, and then I'm just going to adhere it to my sewing machine bed. Now that that's in place, I can do my sewing right up against it. We'll try that again because it popped right off. I can now do all my sewing right up against that little barrier, and it's going to keep me really true and really accurate. A lot of people don't believe in the merits of it, so I like to talk about my little Sophie. She's 10 years old, and when she sews like this. She's just a curious little monkey, that girl. So when she is sewing and being curious and nosy, that barrier really still keeps her seam allowance accurate, and she's still got great 1/4 inch seams, and her quilts are still very accurate despite being such a nosy wee girl. Okay, a little bit more about my setup here today. You can see that I'm sewing on an angle. I've set up my sewing table so that I'm lower at the end that's closest to me, and I've got my non-slip machine pad on here. Even if I pushed my machine, I could not make it fall off the table. This thing is really, truly non-slip. And when I'm sewing in this position, I'm more ergonomically correct. It's less strain on my back and shoulders, which makes me able to sew for longer periods of time. So let's get down to the good stuff, shall we? I'm going to start sewing. Now that I've got my seam allowance all set up and I'm properly and ergonomically correct, I am all ready to go. I've decided to start with my gray blocks because there's only 2 of them and I can get them done quickly, and that gives me a good sense of accomplishment. Isn't that sad? I need little checkpoints to make me feel good about myself. Anyways, I am going to start with my 2.5 inch squares. I need both a print and I need a neutral as well. And those are going to be this center right here, but of my gray blocks. I'm not sure if you can see that here, so I'm using the red as an example. I'm going to sew a white to a gray, and then I'm going to press them. So I'm going to line those up nice and square to one another with the right sides facing. And I am sewing here today on my little Ever Sewn Sparrow 25. It's just a great little machine. And I like to trim as I go so that all those thread tails aren't driving me crazy. And I am going to do all my pressing towards the darker fabric. We all know when there is a lighter fabric, if we press towards that lighter fabric, those seams are going to show on the back side. So I like to begin with what I call setting my seam, and I'm just going to leave it closed, and with my dark fabric up, I'm just going to do a light press on those threads. That sort of just presses the thread into the fabric and makes it flatter. Then I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to press that again. And I like to use the edge of my iron to press right on that seam. I'm going to turn it around here so that you can see, yeah, my ironing mat spins. It's called a roundabout. I like to put the edge of my iron right on the edge of that seam. And it just seems to really flatten it and press it really, really well. And I get a really nice, accurately pieced block. So let's talk about pressing and thread choices and that sort of thing for just a moment. Several years ago, I did a blog post on my blog called Quiltcetera, where I compared different thread weights versus a seam allowance. And the conclusion I came to is that the finer your thread, the more accurate your piecing is. And what happens is when we use a thicker thread in our seam and we fold it open like that, that thickness of thread takes up space in that fold. And that's part of the reason that we quilters use a scant 1/4 inch versus a true 1/4 inch, because when we open that up, that thread takes up more space than just the seam allowance itself. So I had tried a 12 weight, 12, a 28, a 40, and a 50. That's what it was. And I pieced them all and I pressed them all open, and they were all 2.5 inch strips that I had pressed. When I measured my 50 weight, which is the finest thread, that is a little bit confusing. The higher the number, the finer the thread. My 50 weight was bang on. The thread, the piecing, the width of the piece after I pressed it, bang on. My 40 weight was down maybe just a hair. The 30 weight was down significantly, and then the 12 weight was down further yet, because the thickness of the thread took up more space in that fold as I opened it up. Now we have to keep in mind as well, how well did we press? Did we make sure that there was no maybe little roll in the pressing there? If your fabric isn't flat, then of course it isn't going to be accurate. But my conclusion through all of that was that using a 50 weight thread gave me the most accurate results. If you are using a 40 or a 30, I would highly suggest in that case using your scant 1/4 inch seam, which means it's just a little less than 1/4 inch. And then when you open it up, it's accounting for that extra thickness of thread in your seam allowance. And hopefully then you will have some nice, precise piecing, which is what we're all after, right? After all this hard work of piecing in quilts, we want everything to be precise and accurate, right? At least I do. That's my goal. I'm not going to drive myself crazy over it, but if it doesn't work out well the first time, I'll pick it at least once. I'll give it another shot. If I can't get it maybe the 3rd time, to heck with it. It's going in there, and I'm just going to have to live with it, right? Everybody can use a tiny bit of humility, I'm sure. Okay, so enough rambling about that. I'm going to piece my second set and make sure that the right sides of the fabric are facing one another. Now, I also really like to chain piece. And if you don't know what that is, I'll show you in just a second here. I didn't do it with these two, but essentially that means I'll piece one through, I'll lift my presser foot, I'll piece a second one through, and I'll just keep piecing, 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 and then you'll have this long chain of pieced chunks of fabric, and then you can just snip, 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 snip them all apart, and it helps you press them more easily because they're all attached to each other. Of course, you'll press them before you snip, snip, snip them apart. All right, so here we go. I'm always using my little thread cutter on the side of my machine. I just find it really, really handy, the position of it. If you don't have one of those on your machine, you can check out what's called a thread cutter on the website, and it's just a little thread cutter that you can adhere to the side of your machine, and then you've got it handy for snipping all your bits and pieces apart. Okay, so again, I'm going to set my seam, press it with the iron, Open that baby up and give it another good press. I like to hold it for a count of like 4 or 5 just to make sure that everything is really held in place. And when I'm piecing more than one or pressing more than one, I'll bring the next one over and I'll press it right on top. And that just means that everything at the bottom is getting an extra reinforcement of pressing. Now, another little tip that I like to share with you, notice that I'm using the word pressing. I'm not using the word ironing. When I think of ironing, I think of like coasting my iron back and forth over, say, a button-up shirt or a pair of jeans or something like that. When we are using our iron for quilting or for sewing, it's more of a pressing and a lifting. We're not very often ironing. We're not coasting that iron around. We are lifting and pressing. And I find that keeps things more accurate, as when we're ironing, we're pushing that fabric around and it tends to skew things a little. And again, that will make our precision less accurate. So I've got my 2 little bits, a 2.5 print sewn to a 2.5 neutral, and again over here. Now, if you are just joining us, this is the Sparrow Quilt Company Stash Busters series, and we are working on this great quilt called Stay Centered. This quilt measures 60 by 70, so it's a good size for even a beginner. Even if you don't have a stash, it's not a requirement to participate. It is a perfect size for a beginner because it's an easily obtainable goal. When I first began quilting, I started with huge projects. It took me forever to finish them. And sometimes that can be a little bit frustrating or just take too darn long. So if you start with a quilt that's a little bit smaller, then you're going to get done faster and you're going to be happy with your results because you finished something. You feel good about yourself. And we all need a little bit of that, right? So next I'm going to be using my 4.5-inch strips to join on here. I'm sorry, guys, there's my fruit fly personality. Again, getting distracted. What I wanted to tell you is that you're going to go to sparrowquiltco.com to download this pattern for free, no charge at all. You're just going to put in your name and your email address. You'll get an email reply with the pattern attached, okay? Next, I've got my 4.5s. Now, I've already used that fabric, and I've already used that fabric. So next I'm going to bring in 2 different ones because I want some variety here. If I just did the same fabric round and around and around, it would get kind of boring. And nobody likes boring, right? So what I want to do now is put my dark side down, my dark piece down, and I'm going to put the one that I've just pieced on top. Now, the reason I like to do that is because when I am sewing, it helps me keep an eye on this little seam here. I've taken the trouble to press it towards the dark side fabric. I want it to stay in that direction. I don't want it to get flipped over and end up pointing towards the white. So if I have my seam on the top, then I can control better the direction that it's lying. And look, I just want to show off for a second there. My piecing was nice and accurate, which means my 4.5-inch square on the back isn't hanging off on either side. So that's a good sign of my accuracy. Okay. Now, who likes to hold their thread tails as they begin piecing? I always, always do. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but sometimes my threads get drawn down into the bobbin case, and then that makes a little nest, and it sometimes will prevent me from even sewing. So rather than allowing that to happen, if I just hold my threads off to the side as I begin, then they can't get drawn down into the bobbin case of the machine. It's just the mechanics of our machine start moving, and it draws that thread down. And I've encountered that on every type of sewing machine, so I just always do it. Now here we are going to do the chain piecing that I alluded to a moment ago. I've finished that one piece, and now I'm just going to lift my presser foot a little bit. I've not severed the threads. I'm just going to keep sewing. And I'm sewing right up against my ideal seam guide, which means that I'm getting a really nice, accurate 1/4 inch. I'm going to trim my beginning and my ending. And there now you can see my chain, how they're still stuck to one another. This gets a little more fun when you've done 30 pieces and they all just hang in this big long chain. And then you can bring them over here to your pressing surface and just feed them through. And then once they're done, you just snip them all apart. Just a little trick to help you be faster, because sometimes this quilting stuff can be time consuming, right? So again, I'm going to set my seam by pressing right on the thread itself, and then I'm going to lift that darker piece, and that's the side I want my seam to go towards. And like I said earlier, I like to hold that for about a count of 4 or 5. And I am watching my seams even as I'm pressing. I don't like to let my seams get a little bit wonky, we'll say. I'm not going to pull higher at the corners. I'm always checking to make sure that that's a nice straight seam as I press it. And notice I am lifting and pressing. I'm not ironing. How do you like my fancy little iron? Isn't that cute? Have you seen one of those Olisos before? It's got little feet. And as soon as I take my hand off the handle, it pops its little feet up so that it is raised from the sewing surface. So there I have got my center, piece 2 and piece number 3. The next piece I'm going to attach is going to be down here, and it will be another 4.5. I'm going to do that with both of these. At least I better make sure. Are we just going around? I'm going to get out my pattern. Make sure I'm going in the right direction. You got it. So this is our next one. Because I've already got this fabric in this block, I'm going to add this fabric to this block. Here we go. Got it lined up nice and straight. And again, I can see that my piecing is nice and accurate because my pieces are all fitting together properly. And like I said, I like to put that in with the seam up so that I have some control over what's going on there. 1, 2. So we want to think of this as going around. I've sewn on this side, now I'm going to sew on this side. My next piece will go on this side. I'm just continually going around my block. I will line that up and flip this over so that it's ready. And I'll often have pieces stacked all over the place, all ready to go. And I just grab them and I just keep up my chain piecing. Does anybody else like to do chain piecing when they're quilting? And by the way, where are you all watching from today? Where's everybody from? I'd love to hear about where you're watching from in the comments. Please leave me a comment. Gives me something fun to read later after I'm done this video. So here I am, and like I said, I'm holding down that seam so that it stays pointed in the correct direction. And we want to make sure we're sewing the correct side of the block. Easy to mix that up sometimes. All right, chain piecing on to the next one. Tuck that under, and there we go. What I really like about the Ideal Seam Guide is it reduces the strain and the effort. I always find that when I'm just relying on my 1/4 inch foot, it's a constant effort to be watching and making sure that it's lined up. But when I'm sewing up against that barrier, I literally can't help but be accurate, and it's very, very little effort. So these blocks are growing nice and fast. I'm going to flip them over so that my dark piece is on top. I'm going to set that seam. Try not to press my cord. I don't want any melted cords. Flip that open. And this guy too. These are looking really good. Okay, so now those two can be split apart. Now I'm looking for a 6.5 inch log to put across this side over here. So I think I will go back to these colors again. I haven't used this dark gray in this block yet, so I'm going to add this one to here next. This fabric is a linen and it's got a bit more texture than the others, so it's going to give my quilt a bit more interest. Okay, I've got those lined up, and again you can see nothing's hanging off the end. My seam allowance is so nice and accurate. And I'm sewing with my seams up so that I can keep an eye on those little guys, make sure they're going where they're supposed to. Here we go. Okay, almost done this one. Now my next one, I was saying the other day, this one reminds me of like fish eyeballs or caviar or something. Eyes get a little bit buggy when you look at it. But it was sure fun pulling all these fabrics out of the shop stash and picking and choosing. I am very much a pre-cut lover, so that makes it really easy to make quilts. Everything is designed to go together. So when you have to pick and choose and pull your own fabrics, it's a bit of a different challenge. There we go. There's both of those guys. Trim my beginning, trim my end. And again, we'll come over here and place that newly added fabric on top. So again, if you're just joining us, we are working on the Stay Centered pattern, and you can see the finished quilt behind me here. This quilt was designed by Sheila van der Linden, one of our girls that works here for us, and you can find that at sparrowquiltco.com. You're just going to put in your name and email address and you will get the free download, and you can make this pattern along with me. All right, you ready to press? I'm going to set that seam. And we're going to press that open. Number 2, press that open. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm always pressing away from center on this block. I'm always pressing towards my darker fabrics so that my seam allowance doesn't show in my center. Those blocks, even just like that, are super cute. I'm really happy with how those are turning out. What do you think? Look okay? So our next size is going to be, we just sewed here, so then now we're going to sew along this top edge, the same edge that we started on. We've come that far already. And I don't want to put this guy right next to this guy, so I'll save that for my other one, and I'm going to put this gray on here. That one is a little bit, got a big funny fold in it, so I'm just going to press that out while I've got it handy. My little roundabout pressing surface is really handy to have. I didn't realize how helpful it would be to be able to rotate your pressing surface until I had that option. But this little roundabout base comes with a cutting mat and a pressing surface, so it's really versatile and very, very handy for us quilters and sewers. Back to my block, I am going to put this guy on this top edge. And we'll flip that over because, again, we want to sew with our seams up. But fabric's flat. Don't need any folds sewn in there. And I'll just lower that presser foot to hold that in place, and then I'm going to prep this one at the same time. Now, if you wanted absolutely no repetition of fabrics in your quilt, then of course you could use more variety than is shown in the pattern. Pardon me, I don't mind a little bit of repetition, but I do want a bit of variation because I don't just want them all to be the same. It would get boring and it would be kind of blah. And this way, the more fabrics you use, the more you're busting out of your stash and the more interesting your quilt will be when you look at it. All right, are you holding your threads at the back tail there, at the back side there? Holding those seams down as I go, and I'm just gonna keep on stitching. Flip that one over so that my new piece is on the bottom. These guys on top. Now, I do not like to backstitch at the beginning or the ending. I find that it kind of crumples up my starts and ends, and that is just a personal preference. I do have to deal with the side effects of that, though, because sometimes the beginning and end of my seams will come apart just a little tiny bit. So it's always good if you can finish sewing your projects as soon as possible so that your thread doesn't have that opportunity to kind of split apart and come undone. Now, let's see. So my new piece that I've just added is on top. Again, I'm going to set my seam with my iron and just open that up. Make sure that it's nice and flat, that there's no roll in the seam. There we go, we're getting bigger. And those are really looking good. I'm really liking these grays. All right, hopefully you can see those okay. Now, I told you all that I was sewing at my Elite table here, and I am just going to lower it a tiny, tiny bit. This is my favorite part about this table, is that I can lower and raise the surface, and I can also adjust the angle that I'm sewing at. I was starting to feel like it was just a little bit high, so now I'm going to drop it down just a little bit so that I am more comfortable while I'm sewing. That allows me to sew longer, and we all know that that is a really good thing, right? Pardon me, a sip of coffee there so I can keep up to you guys. All right, so now I'm ready to turn my block, and I'm going to be attaching onto this side yet again. And this time I'm looking for an 8.5 inch strip. This one hasn't been used since the center, so I'm going to put it in place along this top edge. And still my piecing is bang on from the help of my Ideal seam guides. There's nothing hanging off either side, which is very beneficial. We all like precision. How'd you do there, Rhonda? Good. We had Rhonda upstairs finishing a quilt. I look crazy, but I'm just doing a live stream. Have a good day, Rhonda. She had the cutest quilt with burly beavers fabric. Have you seen that yet? They're little beavers, and they've got like little toques and flannel coats, and I think I might need some of that. Okay, I got this one all lined up. I'm going to put it under my presser foot. Sometimes it feels like there's so many little things to remember when we're sewing. But it all becomes old hat. The more you do it, the more you practice. This one's not too bad, but sometimes if I'm sewing with tiny, tiny pieces, or if I've got some triangles and there's a seam and then a flat piece of fabric, what can happen is that seam can get pushed aside by my feed dogs and the pressure of the presser foot coming down on it. So I will often use a thin little instrument called an awl, or sometimes I'll even just use my seam ripper, and I will use it to ease things under the presser foot, and it will keep things nice and straight and square, and that helps my precision because we all want precise quilts, right? All right, so that was, I sewed this one first, second, third, 4th, 5th. So we are going here again. Like I said, we're just going around it and around it and around it. So again, I haven't used this one since the center, so I'm going to put it along my top edge, line that up, and then I can flip it over so I can sew it with my seams on top. I just realized I'm hanging my tongue out of my mouth, or I'm often biting my lip. Are you like that too? Do you need to have your mouth positioned just right in order to get the job done? If I'm not doing that, I'm talking to myself or singing. As some of you learned last week when you watched my videos, I didn't know I was on camera yet. And I'm just singing my little heart out. Don't worry, to those of you who were concerned, I'm not quitting my day job. Okay, trim those threads beginning and end, and bring this over to my pressing surface. Now, as you may have already guessed, you are watching me here live in my very own quilt shop. We're in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, where we own a 3,000 square foot quilt shop and long arm rental studio. Upstairs, we've got 2 long arms that we use for finishing customer quilts, and those are outfitted with computers. And our nephew Dylan operates those. And then we've got 2 rental machines that people can come and take a class, and then they can finish their quilts themselves, and Dylan also supervises those folks. And those are all APQS machines, American Professional Quilting Systems. Beautiful machines, love them. We couldn't do what we do without them, that's for sure. But so on my videos, you may see me talking to customers or conversing with staff, and that is because we are a real-life quilt shop that is owned by myself and my husband, and several of our children work here. We're a real family-operated business. Anyways, there's the fruit fly Bradie again, distracted on another tangent. Let's get back to the real job that we're working on here. I have just attached an 8.5-inch log to each of these, and if you just joined us, you don't know what we're working on. This is the Stay Centered quilt pattern. You can see the finished quilt behind me here. You can find this pattern at sparrowquiltco.com, where you can just enter your name and your email, and we will send you an email with the pattern attached, and then you can join us in the fun of busting your stash. Like I mentioned in my prior videos, a lot of people were struggling with the big job of attacking their stash, and the reason I mentioned that this quilt is so good for busting your stash is that it uses a good variety of colors, but it doesn't use a lot of fabric. Each piece that is required is a fat eighth. So if you know what a fat quarter is, a fat eighth is half of a fat quarter. So the piece of that would be about 9 or 10 by 22 inches. So even if you have a favorite fat quarter, you can chop it in half, put back half of it safely in your stash, and you can use the other half in this quilt. And you may love it so much that now you're prepared to use that fabric. My goodness. But a great way to start attacking your stash is to organize it by color. I was really struggling with pulling fabrics for a quilt here in the shop, and we had our daughter Tylee come in and organize everything by color. And it took her all afternoon, like it really was a big job. And so now we've got this beautiful display along the wall here where I'm pointing, which of course you cannot see, but if you watch one of my videos from last week, you'll be able to see the color wall. And they go from like tealy, greeny blues through light blues, sky blues, into the dark blues, into the purples, pinks, reds, and all of it just makes it much easier to see what you've truly got. So my advice to you, if you are really struggling with busting up that stash and using what you've got, organize it by color. Or just start touching it, feeling it. Just get your hands on it. And for some reason, that seems to make it easier to make a decision rather than just looking at the huge amount of fabric that you've got. Try and bust it down into smaller sections, and it may seem like a more attainable goal. All right? Pardon me, I'm just going to grab a drink of water. All right. So next, I suspect we are attaching another 8.5-inch log. So I've got 2 of those left. And this gray is already so close, I'm going to put that one on that one. And I'm going to save my fish eyes for this guy. Line that up. Nice and straight. Bring it over here. And I really do like to make sure that things are lined up nice and square. The more precise we are, the better results we're going to get. But at the same time, don't be making yourself crazy over it. And at the end, I'm always making sure that those 2 little corners line up nice and square as well. We want it to end as square and precise as it began. There we go. Let's see. This one went on last, so this one's next, right? Sometimes you just got to double check to make sure that you're on the right track, and that's okay. Have you heard that saying to measure twice and cut once? It's wise. Never hurts to double check before you jump in, especially when a rotary cutter is involved. Seams aren't as crucial. At least we can pick them out. No one likes that part, but at least you have that option. If you miscut, well, then you got to hope that you've got enough fabric to make up for it. Okay. There we go. 2 more seams completed. And now it's time to press these guys. These are getting bigger now, so I can really only press 1 at a time, but that's okay. Just take our time and be patient, and we get a good product. All the seams are getting pressed to the dark fabric, so away from center. Matt was just telling me from the back there. Matt's the producer, on-site producer, and that's my husband. He's just on the other side of the shelves here, and so he's hollering out questions. If you guys have a question, make sure you leave it in the comments there, and Matt will share it with me, and I'll do my best to address it. So the question was, are the seams all going in the same direction? They're all pressing away from center towards the darker fabric. Now see, we've already got a nice good sized block already. We're making good progress, and that hasn't taken very long at all, has it? So it looks to me like we've got 2 more pieces to sew, and then I think this block will be done. Get 1 more on each side. Nope, 2. 2 more on each side. So here, what do you think? Should we do this one? It's pretty big on the other side. Let me finish her off with that. What do you think, guys? And then this one, we'll put this one here, and put this big guy on that last outer edge. It doesn't look like it fits yet because of the seams. All right. I think that looks just fine. So we'll put that on there, line it up at the corners. But I gotta flip it over because I want my seams on top. Don't forget to keep your seams on top. And what happens if we put our seams on the bottom, the feed dogs can sometimes push them the other way. And with all these dark fabrics next to one another, that wouldn't be such a big deal. But in that center there, I wouldn't want my seams pressing towards the center because they would be very visible. And we don't really want to see them. Although let's admit, it's not the end of the world, is it? Nope. It's not a life or death situation at all. Alrighty. And now I can add this guy next. Do my chain piecing. Line up that corner nice and square. Scoot that under my machine. And like I said, my ideal seam guide, this little plastic piece that I have adhered to the bed of my sewing machine, it helps me stay on track, gives me a nice precise 1/4 inch, which leads to a nice precise quilt. Have you ever pieced a quilt and you just found that the accuracy wasn't quite right and that things weren't fitting together properly the way they should? I have. I think we all have. Nobody is free from that unless you are an absolute perfectionist. And if you are, I salute you. That's amazing. I am still not capable of it, even though I've been quilting for a very long time. So I like to use little tools that just make my job easier. And it's not about not knowing how to use a 1/4 inch. It's about making the job easier for ourselves. If we do a lot of sewing, the eye strain and the effort that's involved with keeping that fabric lined up with that little sewing machine foot, it does take its toll. My eyes get tired. So having tools like this in place to help me be more accurate with less effort are definitely a good thing. All right, shall we press this? Okay. So we start with setting that seam, pressing that thread down, and then we're going to open that up. And like I said, I like to put my iron right along that seam. Get it really nice and flat. And then I'll bring this guy and I'll just set it on top. And I'm going to set my threads and open this up. And by pressing the second piece on top of the first piece, that first one gets a bit more reinforced. Maybe just a little bit flatter. There we go. Good stuff. Okay. So we've got one more round to do along the top edge here. This one gets the dark gray to finish it off. And here, even at the very end, after all these seams, nothing is hanging off, nothing is too small. My ideal seam guide, using my scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, has kept me bang on and really nice and precise. Okay, don't forget to hold those threads as you begin. Here we go. And sew a little faster when the pieces are bigger. Bring out a little bit of the Mario Andretti stitcher in yourself. And this guy is going to go along this top edge. Bring in our fish eyes. Again, we're bang on. I'm so proud. Hey, Maddie, can you come up here and help with the FedEx? I think they need a check. More stuff arriving. All right. Trim those beginner and ending stitches. And this will be our last seam to press for this block. There we go. So I started with the grays like I was saying at the beginning of my video today because I don't know if I've done this correctly, guys. We better double check. See, I should have been following my pattern. I should have been checking each time to make sure I was on track. But we'll double check in just a second here. Okay, snip those apart. All right. So there you see I've got my log cabin blocks, 2 of them. Nice and quick. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm just going to take a 2-minute little bathroom break, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to piece a couple of the neutral blocks that will go above the grays in that row. And you can see this time the center of those will be gray. This time the pressing will be still to the outside, but we're going to be able to see it more because all of our fabrics are neutrals. So it doesn't really, it won't make a difference. We're still going to be able to see it no matter what we do because we've got so many neutrals next to one another. Okay, guys, if you have any comments, I want you to leave them in the comment section there or any questions, and I will get back to them in just a minute. And like I mentioned earlier, if you want to download the free Stay Centered pattern, you're going to go to sparrowquiltco.com and you're going to download that pattern, or you're going to put your information in and we'll email it to you. Okay? So give me 2 moments and I'll be right back. Alrighty, my friends, I'm on my way back. Are y'all ready? Okay, so next, if I am working on the neutral blocks, I'm going to need some grays for my centers. I'm going to need some neutrals to go beside my centers. So here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. We only need 5, so I'm not going to do 2 of those fish eyes. I'll do those, which means I need 5 neutrals. So there's 4, there's 5. Put those back in my pile. And then the 4.5s, I need 2 per block. All right, so let's just do 2 for now because I've not done enough cutting. We'll get there. So 2 and 4. So we'll do this as a center, and we'll do this one because it's my favorite. Yep, that's a Victoria Findlay Wolf in there from her light work line. All right, so set those aside. That means we only need 2 square neutrals. And then the rest of these, we'll just keep them handy. That I don't need. Right. Let's just measure before we begin so that I don't have any mishaps. Those are 6.5s. Those are 8.5s. And those are 10.5s. Perfect. We're set. All right. Put my grays back over here. All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome back. Actually, I'm the one that's back. You guys were here all along. Today we are working on the Stash Busters series, and we are making this awesome quilt behind me here. It's called Stay Centered, and you can find that pattern at sparrowquiltco.com. When you go to that website, you are going to see a picture of me. You're just going to click on my face, and that will take you to another page where you can put in your name, put in your email, and you will receive an email with this pattern attached. Then you can print it off and you can follow along in our Stash Busters series. We know that in January, everybody gets frugal, everybody tightens up that financial belt, and we all seem to partake in these efforts to use up what we've got, which is so smart. We've already invested that money. We've already invested that time in selecting those fabrics. Let's use those precious fabrics that you have in your stash. This pattern is very friendly for scraps. Let's say you got half a fat quarter left over from a prior project. You can throw it in here. It uses mostly fat 8s. Your neutrals are fat quarters. But of course, if you have smaller chunks, you can just use more variety. You are welcome to use as much variety as you like. There's no saying that this has to be a light. We had a quilt come in last summer. She had made it in our pattern here, the Stay Centered quilt, and she had used purples and grays, and this was all black. It was awesome. It was awesome. She was lucky to get that one back. I liked it so much. Just because I'm not talking quite fast enough, I've had a little sip of coffee there. You got to try and keep up with the action around here of piecing these quilts. It's nonstop fun around here, guys. At Sparrow Quilt Company, that's my quilt shop up here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. You are watching live while I sit here like a crazy person talking to an iPad with nobody replying. Just kidding. Hopefully you've all left in the comments where you're watching from or what you're currently working on. I love to see your projects. Share a photo if you can. It gives me something to look at a little bit later when I am done all this yapping on this video. Are you ready to get going again? Good, me too. So I'm going to match a dark with a light. And I am going to get sewing these together, get them ready for myself before I begin. Now, if you missed the beginning of the video, then you didn't see me setting up this seam guide here. Hi there. Yeah, we move everything around all the time. Yeah, it's certainly grown, that's for sure. Yeah, lots to look at. Oh, cool. I'm just doing a live video right now. You're welcome. No, no problem at all. They they expect me to go off on wild tangents. But you're welcome to walk around and shop as well. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I am using my perfect piecing system. I've got my ideal seam guide already in place. In order to determine my seam allowance, I have used this handy little ruler. It's called an ideal seam gauge, and it's got all the different settings on there that represent the different types of seam allowance that you may need. We quilters love our scant 1/4 inch, so what I did is put this underneath my presser foot, drop my needle in that scant 1/4 inch hole, and that gives me the precise location that I can then attach my ideal seam guide. Now that ideal seam guide creates a little barrier upon which I'm going to sew right up against, and that keeps me really accurate and really bang on. And like I was showing everybody as I was piecing these blocks before my little break, my seam allowance was perfect every single time. And I like that. I'm sure you like that. We all like precise quilts because we put a lot of time, effort, and money into these quilts. We want them to look good, right? Yeah, me too. But like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to drive myself crazy over it. If it's not perfect the first time, I'll rip it out once. I'll try it again. After that, it is what it is. But you have to promise yourself that you're not going to point it out to all your friends. Someone gives you a wonderful compliment on the beautiful quilt you've made, accept that compliment. Just say thank you. You don't have to say, but oh, look, my points don't line up. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world. People aren't perfect. We shouldn't expect quilts to be perfect either. But you do have to try. Okay, I'm ready to get piecing. So I've got those lined up nice and precise. And like I mentioned earlier, I always hold my thread tails as I begin sewing. Doesn't seem to matter what machine I'm on. When I start sewing, those threads get drawn down into my bobbin case, which creates kind of a nest. It creates a tangle. Then I have to rethread my machine, and it's a delay. I don't like that, so if I just hold my threads as I begin, it prevents all that issue. And this is called chain piecing. I have finished sewing one piece. I'm not going to sever my threads. I'm just going to lift my presser foot a little bit and stick that next piece under there. Okay. Trim those threads at the beginning and ending. And I'm going to take these over to my handy dandy presser mat. Now, this is going to be the only dark piece of fabric in this block. I'm now doing this block right here with the dark center. So I'm going to press this seam towards that dark center, and as I make my way through the rest of this block, all my seams are going to press away from the center. Everything's going to press out. I start by setting my seam, just pressing down on that seam. It compresses the thread down into the fabric. And then I'm going to open this up and press that open. And it's really important to make sure that that fold is truly open. You don't want it to be partially open, because then you're not going to get an accurate size of piece. So really roll that open and press that down. I used the edge of my iron to really, really press hard on that seam, and that makes things nice and flat. My handy little pressing service here is called a roundabout, and it is very versatile because it comes with a base that rotates, and I can also use my cutting surface, so I could cut circles, or I could cut all kinds of different things. Sometimes you find you want to cut something here and then you want to turn it around and you want to cut the other side. So you can see that it's got all the markings on there that you might possibly need. Let's say you were squaring up a bunch of blocks. This would be really handy in that regard. And the great thing about these types of cutting mats is that they're accurate. You could truly cut right using these lines on the cutting mat and you wouldn't have any errors. It would be true. So I don't only have the cutting surface, I've also got the pressing surface. And again, I can use that on a rotating basis. And it's not just handy, but it's fun. All right, so enough about that. I'm now ready to put my next log onto my log cabins that I'm piecing here. So what I like to do is put my seams up. That way my feed dogs don't accidentally grab it and press that seam allowance the other direction where I don't want it to be. If I have my seam up, then I can control my seam. And I understand that sometimes you're pressing seams to seams and we don't always have that option, but wherever possible, I like my seam to be up. I'm going to line up those corners and put that over here. I just like to lower my presser foot to hold that in place, and I'm going to get this one ready to go next. I'm a big fan of preparing everything first and then doing all the sewing, and that way it seems more efficient to me, and it seems a bit more like an assembly line. Just getting one step done to entirety, moving on to the pressing, coming back and sewing. It just makes more sense to me. I feel like I get a better flow. So I will often have like rows and rows and rows of stuff all lined up all around my sewing area. And then I'll piece them all, and then I'll move to the next step for everything. Have you all left me a comment there telling me where you're watching from today? I was just thinking that maybe we should have a little giveaway today. What do you guys think? And you're already on it. What are you giving away? Oh. All right. So none of you probably heard that. I was just saying I'd like to do a giveaway, and Matt says he's already announced it. So how that's going to work is if you share this video on Facebook, right underneath the video you'll see a little share link, and you will be able to share it with all your friends and tell them what you're watching today. And what you are entered to win is this awesome roundabout. And it is a great tool. You're really going to love it. So what you're going to get is that spinning base. It'll come with the cutting surface, and it'll also come with the pressing surface. Okay, that is a really, really great prize, guys. So you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. Share this video in order to be entered, and we will make a draw for that at the end of the video today. Okay, all right. That is completed, that step anyways. And if you are just joining us, to get you up to speed, we are working on the Stay Centered quilt pattern today. You can see the quilt on display behind me here. It is a very simple quilt, great for beginners, also great for someone who is looking to bust up their stash. If you don't have a stash, we will have kits available on the website for you to purchase if you're interested, and you can look for those later today. I'm always pressing away from center on these blocks. So this time, all my logs that I'm adding are a neutral. They're a light colored fabric. They aren't going to disguise my seam allowance, but that's okay. It's not the end of the world if you see the seam allowance through the quilt. In fact, when you look at this here, can you even see the seam allowances? Just say no. Just kidding. You probably can a little bit, but it's not the end of the world, just like I said. So I am going to set my seam first. I always press on just the seam to kind of nestle the threads into the fabric. And then I'm going to open that up. And like I said, I like to use the edge of the iron to really just reinforce the press on that crease there. Open that up. And I'm really liking these linens in this quilt, by the way, guys. I don't know if any of you were watching last week while I did my first two videos, but I got really excited when I found some linen on my shelf. I didn't even know it had arrived. So I'm excited to put that into this quilt because it's got a slightly more chunky feeling to the fabric versus just a regular quilting cotton. And I don't mean just. We all know all quilting cottons are fabulous. But it just seems to have a bit more personality, we'll say. So we are making our way around these blocks. This was 1, this was 2. That means this is going to be 3. So again, I'm sewing a 4.5 inch long log, and all my strips are 2.5 inches. So that, for you jelly roll owners, will be really exciting because you could literally just use your jelly rolls in this project. I'll admit the neutral jelly rolls aren't as common, but you can find them on our website. 2.5 inches wide, and then you would just be cutting your 2.5s, 4.5s, 6.5s. So you'd already have your 2.5 widths cut. And if you have any questions about the rulers in those videos, just make sure you ask, and I'd be happy to help with that information. This cream is almost identical to the one that's just there, the last one I sewed. So I am going to bring in this tone on tone. It's got a little bit of a print to it, and I want a bit more interest here. So I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to flip it over to sew it. And I want those corners to be lined up nicely before I begin. Do you consider yourself to be a precise sewer? I sure do my best, but sometimes I'm surprised at the results. I'll look at my finished product and I'm like, was I even paying attention? So sometimes we need all the help we can get trying to stay on track, because it can get a little bit crazy. All right. You may hear the doorbell now and then. That's because we are in a real live quilt shop. We got customers coming and going. We've got staff all over the place. We rent our machines upstairs so that people can come in and finish them on a long arm. So you may even hear some long arm machines running. This isn't just me sewing in my basement. I'm in a real life quilt shop. All right, trim those. And I am ready to press again. Set my seam, open her up. Okay, so despite my very best efforts to be precise and accurate, I am starting to get a little bit of an overhang. And I was so proud through my gray blocks. I didn't have any of this happening. I was bragging, so I kind of deserve it now to get this. But what you can see is just that little tiny bit of extra hanging off the edge there. So let's go ahead and measure and see how big my block is. It should be 4.5 inches wide. And it's pretty darn close. 1, 2, 3. I'm just a wee bit under the 4.5. So what I'm going to do is trim that a little bit, because I think that it makes me more precise if I trim that now and I have a nice straight edge to sew on. You know, if I go to attach another piece, that's pretty significant what's hanging off there, probably at least 1/8 of an inch. And like I said before, I like my quilts to be accurate because I am fussy. Let's see here. So it's measuring a hair under 4.5. And that's okay, because I'm human and I make mistakes too. Just let me grab my ruler, guys, and I'll be right back. You can't see me, but you can still hear me. I just need a little one. It's a good thing about being in a quilt shop is you usually have all the supplies you need. I am just opening a 6-inch squaring ruler so that I can use this. Also going to need my rotary cutter. Just bear with me as I wander around the shop here. Oh, I can't find, there it is. I posted online this morning how messy my space was, and my friend Judy from Manitoba was teasing me, saying that it looked like the after picture of after cleaning up. Okay, so really what I want to do here is just trim off that extra little jut. Can you see there that's hanging out a little bit? So I'm going to line up as square as I can, and I'm just going to trim that a little bit so that my future sewing will be on a straight line and I don't have any troubles. I was not pressing hard enough. There we go. Okay, so now that looks a lot better to me. When I sew my next piece on there, it's going to be onto a nice straight line. Now this is a good idea to square your blocks. I don't necessarily recommend squaring every single time you add a log, but at the end of piecing all your blocks together, you're definitely going to want to square each and every block so that they all fit together nicely, and that's just going to make your life a little bit easier. Because we all want to enjoy this hobby of ours. And so these little steps that we can take to make it more enjoyable, although it may feel like a bit more work, we still want to enjoy it and have good results. All right. Now this one had 2 bad sides. But like I said, I'm human and I'm okay with that. But now we know the steps that we can take to make that a little bit easier on ourselves. All right, there we go. Remember to always close your rotary cutter so you don't chop off your hand or fingers. Sewing is hard if you don't have fingers. Okay, so those are trimmed and ready to add our next piece. And at this point, it's pretty obvious what piece is missing. That's the next one we're going to add, and it will be a 6.5-inch log. So I got a nice variety of creams, whites, off-whites, and such. I haven't used this one in here yet, so I'm going to bring it in. Make sure I'm using the right side up. Oh, good. This one fits nice. I like it when that happens. Okay, so I've got that on there so that it fits. And I'm going to flip it over so that my seams are on top. I like the solid fabric to be on the bottom. And here we go. Now, have you shared this video with all your friends on Facebook yet? You want to be entered into a draw to win our roundabout pressing and cutting system. Once you enter, or once you share the video, you will be entered for that great prize. Okay, now this time, let's just bring in this guy that's on top. Good, lines up nice again. Just making my little day over here. Sneak that under there, and what you see me doing here is called chain piecing. I don't sever my threads between my pieces, I just carry on and piece the next one. And then I have created a chain of pieces that I have pieced together. Okay. So I am going to lay those on my pressing mat with the piece that I have just sewn on top, and I am going to always be pressing away from center with these blocks. go ahead and set that seam and then open her up. And you really want to make sure that there's no extra fabric, that it's opened up as much as it possibly can be. And I do recommend using a thinner cotton piecing thread. A 50 weight is my favorite. And I can slice those apart, and those are turning out pretty good. So we've just attached those top ones. Our next piece is going to come down this side again on both of those. And these are 6.5s. Good, that fits nice. That fits perfect too. Like I told you earlier, I like to prepare everything and then sew everything, and it just makes my job seem a little bit easier. But of course, the second you pick it up, you got to fiddle with it and make sure that it's on there square and precise again. Okay. There's one. And here's number 2. And I'm sewing with that solid fabric on the bottom so that I can control my seams on top. Make sure that they're staying in the direction I piece them. And there we go. Trim, trim. I'm not sure I used to trim my threads so much until we became long armers. And we realized the importance of trimming our threads, because when you piece a quilt, say if you look at the one that's behind me, in those red and white blocks, what if there was red fabric fray showing underneath the white, or showing over under here? Any of these stray threads would show underneath that fabric, and we don't want to see those threads underneath. So I've learned to trim my threads as I go, and then it's less work when I get to the point of bringing it for long arming or whatnot. All right, those are sewing up really nice. Next, I need to do this side, and we are going to be into the 8.5s now. And I'm going to get those other shapes and sizes out of there so I don't get confused. Yep, that looks about right. So I am going to lay this one out. That's going to go there. And this one's going to go here. Now, are you just joining in? Have you just started watching us here in the Sparrow Quilt Company Stash Busters series? We are making this fun log cabin quilt behind me here. It's called Stay Centered, and you can find it at sparrowquiltco.com. There's a picture of me on the front page there. You're just going to click on it, go to the next page where you will put in your name and your email address, and we will send you an email with the pattern attached so that you can download it, print it out, and you can follow along in the fun. If you haven't got a great big stash, then you can watch the website later today. We will have the quilt kits of the exact quilt that I am making today, and you can purchase one for yourself. If you do have a stash, then I suggest that you start going through that stash, organizing yourself by color, and all you need is a fat 1/8 of each fabric that you're putting into the quilt. If you want to use more, that's fine too. Just have less variety. If you want to use smaller pieces, then you'll have more variety. It all works. This is not a fussy quilt, and it's a nice size, 60 by 70, so it's an attainable goal. It won't take you years and years to make this. It's very simple. All right, so you go check that out, and I'm going to keep sewing. And we are going to continue to do daily Facebook videos. It's not always going to be me. You're not always going to have to listen to me talk all darn day. Sometimes it will be Dylan upstairs. broadcasting live while he finishes Quilter's quilts. And that's fun to watch too. If you've ever sent in a quilt, you can watch that stream. Maybe you'll get to see your own quilt being finished. That would be cool, hey? We also have renters upstairs that come and rent the long arm quilting machines, and Dylan supervises them as well. So they're up there working hard on their own projects because we offer a class here. You can come and learn to use the machine, and then you can finish the quilts yourself. Of course, that only works if you live in or near Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Although we've had lots of people join us from far. Had a couple of ladies come out from the East Coast. Lots come down from up north. There aren't long arm quilters everywhere, so sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to finish those quilts. All right, 2 more logs sewn into our blocks. And now they're getting to a size where I can only press 1 at a time. But I'm just going to be patient. I'm going to pretend I can be patient. I'm not a terribly patient person, I must admit, despite having 10 children. Yep, that's what I said, 10 children. Matt and I have 10 kids. Our 3 oldest kids work here. Our oldest daughter and her fiance. And then our oldest son works here and his girlfriend. The rest of them are too small to work here. But I really had a laugh the other day. Our 8-year-old, his name is Ziggy. And he said to me, "Mom, when we become an adult, do we have to work for you at the shop?" And I said, "No, son, you don't have to work for us, but you can if you like." And he said, "Good, because I'm going to start a business and it's going to be called Zig's Zippers." So I love that he's already a little entrepreneur and planning his big company. I mean, you got to put zippers in everything, right? Winter jackets, jeans. I think he's going to do just fine. So next, I am going to have to attach another 8.5-inch log, and I'm going to be coming down this side. So we'll put that on there. Now, again, I'm having that little issue where I've got a little bit too much fabric. It's hanging off just a wee bit. So if you look carefully, you can see it there. Do you see that wee bit on that bottom log is sticking out just a little bit? So now I want to show you how I'm going to fudge this so that it looks straight and I don't necessarily have to trim that before I begin. I'm going to line up this bottom corner so that it is square, and the log is lined up all along the block until that little jut. And I'm going to leave that jut hanging out just a wee bit, and I'm going to sew along this piece, not there. I'm going to keep this consistent seam allowance using this smaller fabric, not using that bigger one. All right, so that's how I fudge when I have a little bit of an off piecing. All right. Good stuff. Okay, everybody. Guess what? We've come to the end already. I know I talked all the way through all of that. I can't believe it's over already. Every time they have to come and tell me to shut it down, and I feel like I'm just getting started. So I want to thank you all for watching today. I want to thank you all for sharing this stream. It's so exciting for me to see where you all are watching from, and just the fact that you're all willing to participate and be a part of this wonderful thing that we all love, quilting. So the good news, Marlene, Tony, I hope you're still watching. You are the winner of our roundabout pressing and cutting system. I will need you, Marlene, to please send us here on the Sparrow Quilt Company page a private message giving us your email, your phone number, and your shipping address, and we will get that out to you as soon as we possibly can. All right. I'm going to see you all again on Wednesday. I'm going to keep sewing, and I will show you my progress when I get back. And make sure that you visit our Stash Busters page at the sparrowquiltco.com website and you will be able to see all the prior videos and any of the products that we have been using in any of the videos. All right? Again, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Take care, and bye for now. Wow, you guys, it smells delicious. What are you eating?